This video is brought to you by The Corbett Report, 2009 Video Archive. Buy your copy today at corbettreport.com.
This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com with your Sunday update for this 19th day of December 2010. And now, for the real news. Globalist warmonger Richard Holbrooke died earlier this week from complications arising from an aortic dissection. Although it was initially reported that his last words had been to tell his doctor that the war in Afghanistan must be stopped, it was later revealed that rather than a weepy deathbed conversion, this statement had in fact been uttered as a joking statement about the never-ending war in Afghanistan, and that Holbrooke in fact died an unrepentant tool of the globalist system of military imperialism which he had served his entire life. Yeah, see if you can take care of that, including ending the war, Holbrooke is now claimed to have told his doctor shortly before his death, evidently joking about the fact that the Afghan war became the longest war in American history earlier this year, having so far cost an estimated $376 billion, as well as the deaths of over 2,000 coalition servicemen and an unknown number of Afghani civilians who are not deemed worthy of an accurate body count. Recently, it was revealed that 92% of Afghanis respondents to a public opinion survey had never even heard of 9/11 or the supposed reason for the NATO-led invasion and occupation of their country. The American government-sponsored, corporate-owned, and foundation-funded media are now working desperately to spin Holbrooke as a man of peace, whose diplomatic life's work was to resolve and end conflicts, rather than manipulate and engineer them for the benefit of his well-connected peers in the Council of Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg Group, of which he was a member. The media are now pointing to his role in brokering the Dayton Peace Accords as proof that he was in fact a peacemaker. But as alternative media are pointing out, that is completely opposite to his demonstrable role as a key enabler of conflict and the expansion of American military aggression around the globe. In 1977, Holbrooke visited Indonesia as Assistant Secretary of State, ostensibly to push brutal military dictator Suharto on human rights issues. In fact, he was there to reassure Suharto that America applauded his efforts to resolve Indonesian issues, effectively giving him a free pass on his genocidal death squads in East Timor. Hundreds of thousands of East Timorese were slaughtered, while Holbrooke delivered well wishes from the military-industrial conglomerate that is commonly referred to as the American government. In early 1999, shortly before the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, Holbrooke met with Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic in order to deliver an ultimatum known as the Rambouillet text, which called for authorization of NATO occupation of the country, including immunity for NATO personnel from any prosecution, free and unimpeded access for NATO troops to any part of the country, and use of all roads, rails, and airports without payment. Not only was Holbrooke proud of the fact that he delivered this unsignable deal to Milosevic, which ultimately led to the bombing of Yugoslavia, he then lied about his own comments on the matter.
I've told you already what they said, that the choice you've given us is to have our sacred soil violated by an invading force. I said this isn't an invasion, it's not an occupation, it's an international peacekeeping force that will save the Serb minority in Kosovo and so on.
You've said since you gave the ultimatum to President Milosevic that the Rambouillet Accords do not call for the occupation of Yugoslavia.
I never said that. That's the end of that. You've got the wrong person and the wrong quote.
He went on to praise the bombing of Serb television, an act which killed 16 media workers, as a major victory in the American-led NATO-endorsed destruction of Yugoslavia. In 2003, he praised Colin Powell's completely debunked presentation of the case for attacking Iraq before the UN Security Council as, quote, a masterful job of diplomacy by Colin Powell and his colleagues, going on to say, quote, Saddam is the most dangerous government leader in the world today, and that we have a legitimate right to take action. He was a member of the CFR, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderberg Group, as well as a board member of AIG, Coca-Cola, AOL, Time Warner, and Human Genome Services. Observers who are not owned or controlled by these or other affiliated entities are noting that he will ultimately be remembered for his service to the powers of globalization, his devotion to the institutionalized exploitation of the poor and oppressed, and his tireless efforts to shore up support for American military domination from the phony left side of the controlled left-right political duopoly.
Holbrooke, we're not your slaves, Holbrooke! We're not your slaves! Holbrooke, we don't belong to you! We're not your property! Get back on the sidewalk! We're free humanity! Yeah, there he goes. Coward.
Also this week, the sovereignty-ending Lisbon Treaty that ended any pretense of independence for the European nations that signed onto it is once again in the news, as the EU-27 agreed to an alteration of that treaty, providing for the establishment of a permanent crisis mechanism that will expand the strength, scope, and reach of the EU at the expense of the individual nation-states that have been subjugated by international financiers. Irish Taoiseach Brian Cowan added insult to injury by claiming that the treaty alterations were minor and that they did not require a referendum to seek the approval of the Irish people. The Lisbon Treaty itself, representing the repackaged EU constitution, which was voted down by European voters in 2005, was famously rejected by the Irish people in 2008, so the EU simply forced them to vote on it again, breaking their own election laws in the process, and the treaty was ratified after the revote in 2009. Now, people of all political stripes are shedding their petty doctrinal differences to identify the real perpetrators of this current crisis and are uniting to say that they will not allow hundreds of billions of their euros to be used to bail out international financiers and speculators for fraudulent debts, and they will not allow this crisis to be used by the failing EU in a desperate grab for even more power.
Thank you, President. I voted against the resolution establishing a permanent crisis mechanism for the Eurozone because in Ireland and in Greece we see the reality that such mechanisms are to bail out a crisis-ridden financial system dominated by speculators and assorted profit-seeking sharks at the expense of working people, the pensioners and the poor. Today in Brussels, the European Council will most likely decide to amend the Lisbon Treaty to give itself more powers to impose strict conditionality on any financial assistance given to member states, thus institutionalising the doctrine that society must pay for the crisis. I warn the Irish Government not to think it can foist this change to the Lisbon Treaty on the Irish people without a referendum. The Irish Government has already turned our country into a vassal state of the IMF, which is acting blatantly on behalf of the speculators in the financial markets. We demand a referendum on any change to the Lisbon Treaty so the Irish people will have the opportunity to resist being turned full-time into serfs of the financial markets. Thank you. But I do predict that the level of debt now is simply unpayable. It is unquestionably the case that there will be a default in the next years. So we say, why wait for then and subject our people to enormous pain and suffering for nothing? We should refuse to pay the bondholders now immediately. That's the key point. And then develop a plan to redevelop our economy.
Indeed, as the past week has demonstrated, people are fed up and ready to take to the streets in country after country as it becomes ever more apparent that the entire financial crisis is in fact being used as an excuse to transfer what's left of middle-class wealth to the ultra-rich international banking cartels and to form de facto world government from the ashes of the current political order, exactly as predicted by numerous economic experts.
The heir to the throne and his wife under attack tonight in the heart of London. The expression of shock on the faces of the royal couple clear to see. The Duchess of Cornwall looks particularly taken aback. This was an attack at close quarters. A window smashed in their Rolls-Royce. The car, a state vehicle, splattered with paint. Amateur footage captured the moment when the crowd realised the royals were in their midst. They were on their way to the Royal Variety performance. Their route took them right into the middle of the street protests.
The car got kicked pretty severely, I saw it. A lot of people were kicking his car. He was surrounded with lines of police on motorbikes, and they tried to protect him as much as they could, but there were too many people.
Okay, as you can see behind me, they've now tried a different window. and they successfully got through it. The police have done another massive unlawful kettling of all these people, and they get a bit pissed off, so the Treasury's getting fucked.
Everybody go on next, join UK.
The normally upmarket shopping district looked like this afterwards. Burnt cars smouldering outside one of Rome's top hotels, shops and offices damaged. Many closed their businesses and watched in horror.
This is a pretty undignified end to Silvio Berlusconi's day. He may have won the vote in Parliament, but the battle on the streets is still raging on.
Let's take you overseas now to Greece, where workers have taken over the streets of Athens today. That's tear gas you see there. Protesters clashing with police. Some in the crowd threw Molotov cocktails and police responded. The hostile scene sent some Christmas shoppers running for cover. Now, demonstrators are furious over the Greek government's austerity measures. And our Ann McMillan is watching the story. She's watching it from London, but has more detail on the protests. And Ann, those are our latest pictures. What's the latest information from Athens this morning?
Heather, around 15,000 people are on the streets of Athens this morning, or this afternoon. Police are using tear gas against demonstrators, throwing Molotov cocktails and starting fires outside Greek Parliament. There are reports of a former cabinet minister being attacked by a mob who hit him in the face, threw a bottle at him, and he had to run into a building to escape and then couldn't get to hospital because the crowd was braying outside.
Now, please go to CorbettReport.com to download episode 167 of the Corbett Report podcast, Social Engineering and You, where we examine how the technocracy manipulated the populations of the world in the 20th century and how they plan to do so in the 21st.